So welcome to everybody, and I'd like to welcome you to the first municipal meeting of the year of the Constitution Committee. So thank you everybody, thank you everyone for the work that we've done in the previous school year and in advance for all of the work we're going to continue to do. I want and I want to I'm just thinking on and then any declarations of interest.
Oh, hold on, sorry. Oh, she has something to text. She's running late.
Okay, so apologies for lateness. Great, thank you. And then if we move on to item 3, pages 7 to 12, the minutes of the previous meeting. So I'm going to ask you to agree in a minute, but before I do, there's a few things that I want to pick up. Matters arising, which will be action 1, 4, 5 and 6 will be provided under item 5 of the agenda this evening. Action 2, officers will need to schedule a meeting with IPT colleagues and the working group. That still has not happened and is in the midst of being arranged. It has actually, that's badly worded off there. I'd rephrase that. It hasn't happened because officers are trying to establish where will be the best point to have the meeting rather than have context of everything. And I think just because of the nature of the work that they do, they want to have the IPT meeting at the right time, and then they'll talk about the English and the ability of the document itself. And then action 3, there was going to be a note, if you remember, the procurement officers were going to provide a note that was going to be sent to members around the procurement bill. There is a draft, but it has not been fully approved yet. But as soon as that has been confirmed, that will be circulated to members, not just from the procurement committee, but also the Constitution Committee as well, given them raised here. So now we move on to item 4, which is the terms of reference of the Constitution. And again, welcoming Donald to the meeting of the first municipal year, but you've got to stay, that is fine. So can members please note the membership that was confirmed at the annual general meeting just on the 17th of May. And I'm just happy to agree that. Agree. Any contributions or comments on terms of reference? Okay. So now we're going to move on to item 5 of the agenda, which is the sustainable item. And as I said to you, we'll pick up actions on 1, 4, 5 and 6. Actually, now that I've spoken about those 2 action points, before we move on to item 5, can I ask members to agree the minutes of the previous meeting? Agree. Thank you. So item 5. So just to remind you, as it's the first meeting, and I'm not sure if we have anyone watching live at the moment, but if people watch this back, we have changed the nature of the meeting after myself and Councillor Gordon as the Vice Chair met with Dawn and Louise, and we decided not to have a page turn together in public. As members, we all do a page turn because we all look through documents on our own. But what we thought would be more useful is out of our own individual page turn if we raise those queries collectively here. And the reason that we have this Constitution meeting now is that we have an internal working group and having lots of cross-party engagement and thought that after a conversation with Dawn and Louise, that actually a public meeting and committee where members of the public can get to see what we're doing in more detail was the right way forward to ensure that we're transparent about the work that we're doing on the Constitution, because we didn't want the general public to think that we are minimising or doing anything to hinder their democratic right to access up. But what we want to do is sharpen that. So that's just a little bit of background. On that note, I'm going to hand over to Louise.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bramble. Good evening, members. Apologies, you are at the far end of a very, very long room as far as I can make you out. So you are particularly tiny on my screen, and I'm actually unable to make out any hands or who may be waving them, other than they are being waved. So apologies if I don't see a hand going up, or indeed I'm sort of struggling to see who may be speaking at any one given moment. Before we kick off, obviously, as you have before you on the papers, this is you have with your appendix the presentation of the entirety of the new constitution proposed in draft. So before we consider looking at that in detail, I just wanted to thank you, members of the Constitution Committee, for all your hard work on this over the previous municipal year in terms of looking at earlier versions of drafts and commenting and making revisions. It's been much appreciated by myself. I know it's been much appreciated by Dawn as the monitoring officer, and also by our Constitution Officer Working Group. Primarily, the purpose of this meeting is for you to let us know if there's anything else within the draft as now presented that you would like us to consider. And as officers, we are now turning our attention to getting the document ready for full council in July, so that hopefully council will approve its adoption. So that meeting, as you know, is on July the 26th. And we will be publishing the agenda, as always, 5 working days beforehand. You as a committee will next meet on the 12th of July. And at that point, we will be letting you have sight of the final draft as we'll be going forward to council on the 26th. And then once council has approved the document, and I'm going to use the word once they have rather than hope they have, then what officers will be doing will be adding in all of the hyperlinks and bookmarks to the document. I'm sure you will have noticed that they're not yet now. That is a deliberate thing by officers. That isn't the case if we just haven't, we just haven't done it yet. That's deliberately we haven't done it yet, for the reason that if we insert them at this stage and there are still changes to be made, then we run the risk of all of those links therefore having to be redone, or they get broken, or they don't work. And it will take a considerable amount of time to do that work diligently. And we don't want to find ourselves in a position where, having done that, the first time we go to use it, a link doesn't work because of a change that's been made. And then once the hyperlinks and the bookmarks have been added, then the documents will be put onto the council's website, and we will then go through a process of trying to do some promotion and publicity around the fact that we have a new constitution, where people can find it, how they can use it, what that means for them, to try and draw more attention to the fact that we have it, and how that then works with them in terms of the people, residents, businesses getting involved in our decision-making processes. So that's a brief plan of where we are going next. We also have already identified some work streams for even after that point. One of the things that the Officer Working Group would like to do is produce a sort of accompanying guide to the Constitution, which will be a shorter document, but explain some of the key principles. So a sort of a ready reference type guide. And And then we will be turning our attention also to the format and approach of our internal officer scheme of delegations. So those will be the next 2 phases of work. I certainly wouldn't want you as members of our Constitution Committee to be thinking that once this is done, there will be nothing for you to get involved with. There certainly will be. And then also potentially around year 1, after we adopt the Constitution, we'll want to then look at how is it working in practice. How has it been received by the public? Has that impacted? Have we had greater participation? Is it working from a plain English perspective? Are there still things we can improve upon? And similarly, also understanding from members, having made these changes, what and with those changes now being in force, how does that impact upon you as elected representatives, and the things, the questions that you ask, the motions, does it continue to work and serve that purpose, or again, do we continually need to refine it? So that's where we're going. But as I say, this is primarily for you to let us know if you think there's anything still missing from the draft as we now have it. Again, I will just by way of reminder, we are now starting our page turn for spelling, punctuation and grammar. We have already spotted things, so I'm not going to pretend that we think it's, we spotted some missing full stops, we've spotted referencing that needs to be updated. So we continue to do that process, but primarily this is now your opportunity to say, I think we need to look at that again, or we need to address that. So with that said, I'm in your hands.
Thank you so much for that overview, and I think it's important why you didn't put the hyperlinks in there. I think no one wants to duplicate work, so that sounds quite useful. I think the work has really taken shape, and I'm really pleased that all these elected members make suggestions or critical challenge or ask for clarity. All of that can be seen in the flow of the document. So I just wanted to note the work of Dawn and the team. Councillor Troughton, I saw you indicate.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. So, yes, following the email that I sent out, I think this morning, could we suggest that on page 495, the terms of reference in licensing, that substitutes the permitting in that terms of reference? Simply because I understand licensing is struggling to convene daytime meetings to find members with sufficient availability. And there are members like myself who are quite happy to, step into that gap, but not necessarily having the time for additional evening time meetings. So by having substitutes, that would solve that issue.
Did you say 495?
For page 495 of the document, or 474 of the policy document.
So Louise or Dawn may want to come back on that point. I know that we have discussed it actually, as we before Councillor Troughton had raised this, because I know that sometimes it's really challenging for those meetings to convene because of the nature of what members being so busy and pressed. So preempting that, I know that we had a discussion, and you Dawn and Louise reassured me that if members do come and present this proposal, that it's something that we could do. So just to reassure you, Councillor Troughton, that's something that we can quite easily arrange. So you're welcome, and thanks for raising it here. Councillor Gordon, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just on that proposal, I think just to clarify, and this would clarify the constitution as well, if there are substitute members of the licensing subcommittees, they won't be full members of the licensing committee. Their attendance won't be required at the licensing committee. It's the purpose of the hearings. I think that was just clarified.
That's, yes,
Yeah.
I think we have to say that.
And I think, I think that is the only sort of influence like people, students don't want to but I think so.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
More broadly,
Yes, please, Councillor.
yeah, I've got a few different ones. I think primarily it's just a bit of understanding of how our comments previously have been incorporated, because there's some areas where I know I've made some comments and they haven't necessarily been incorporated. So, for example, on page 19 of the Constitution, I sort of suggested it would be good to align what it says in 1.14 with what it says on 1.6 around protecting and, if possible, enhancing the natural environment to benefit the residents and environment. Having that sort of the things that people can do. And then there were some questions which I'm not sure if I heard back from the working group on. For example, on page 31, there's a question around who is the principal opposition and what is the meaning of incumbent within that, and is that a legal requirement that they are if groups are of equal size, does that consistency have to be there, or is there other measures that the council put in to decide which is the principal opposition group? And then got a few other more general points. So for example, on page 32, 3.7, it says question of the cabinet, and I'm just wondering if we need to clarify whether that means question to the cabinet meeting or to the cabinet generally, in terms of the responsibilities for general members.
Sorry, Councillor, which page is on there?
Sorry, that's page 32 of the Constitution.
Oh, the Constitution.
Yeah, so I was on my page when I was on the Constitution. And a lot of other things. Page 117, 5.8 seems to contradict page 32, 3.7. I know these are all just firing at lots of numbers. This is quite a lot of stuff here.
So, sorry, Justin, could I just take these to be
Yeah.
two or three easy?
Sure.
Yeah, that's it.
Should we work backwards? So 117 and 5.8.
What was your point for that?
It seems to contradict, sorry, let me just pull it up myself. My paper is better match up with.
Yes.
So yeah, so 5.8 seems to contradict on page 32, 3.7. So
In
5.8, sorry.
So part 5 of the draft agenda starts from 141, but the printed page should be 160. So this is quite full. That's this one.
5.8, part 4 procedure rules.
Okay, so part 4.
Sorry, I should say share with 21 with this one. So contradicts 6. So 32, 7. A lot of stuff to go through here. So yeah, this is around right responsibilities. Sorry. Sorry, I'll get more detail on that one.
Yeah.
There was one more here on page 102, 17.18H. What is the guillotine procedure? I couldn't see that, quite right. And that didn't seem to make, any sense to me as to what that was.
Where is that somewhere in
102.
of the constitution?
Yeah.
Oh, it's implementation.
1718H.
Yeah.
Hey, I got it.
Sorry, it's a very long document, so I just tied myself up in last minute.
That's right.
So for example, with regard, sorry, Charles.
Of course.
So with regards to, the query that you have, this is on the motions. So motions which may be made during any debate. So what you're saying, it'd be better for us to explain what the guillotine procedure is.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
So I imagine that something on the hyperlink.
That could be a hyperlink.
Yeah, glossary.
Oh, it's a glossary, yeah. So we can, you're absolutely right. Because,
There was a couple of other sort of technical things around what constitutes is chairperson a term that we go with, or is that speaker, for example, on page 301? I raised that before, is are we standardising the term for the speaker as the speaker or the chairperson? And
So it's that page 301.
301, yeah.
Oh, that's 6.
So, I don't know which one that was. And yeah, going back to the one on page, sorry, I'm jumping around a lot here. On page 31, around the incumbent of the principal opposition. Also, in terms of terminology, are we standardising principal opposition or majority opposition, large opposition? It's not entirely clear to me, the implication of those words in which one we're going for. And yeah, that question around is it important for if the parties are of the same size after an election? I can understand if mid-term people change party, then it would make sense to the incumbent to remain the principal opposition. But if there's an election, is there not a better way of deciding which party would be the principal opposition?
Okay, so we just need a standard way of formatting that, irrespective of the nature, can't really political party.
Well, it's more a question of is it a legal requirement that the principal opposition is the so-called incumbent at the point of an election?
Okay. So
I would say a sense of the two opposition groups at the same time.
let's pause there because there were lots of points. Natalie, I know you're going to any points that you need to follow or
I will pick them up off the recording.
Okay.
I can use the motor to his email.
That would be helpful. So I'm just going to pause there before we bring in more. What I wanted to know is the reason for on the back of any of that. Did anyone want to make any contributions or reflections? I mean, some of them are quite straightforward. And I wanted to pick up on the hyperlink versus the glossary. I'm not quite sure if ICT colleagues think it's more work, but I just think they should be both. Because in my mind, especially as I have dyslexia, if there's a word that what I suppose to me, there's a word that I can't really pronounce or I don't know, if I'm going to go in the glossary somewhere else, I'm going to find it really hard to hold that information. So if there's a hyperlink, I want to link straight into it. And I think even if you don't have dyslexia, no one wants to stop the flow of reading something. So I ICT not in the room, so I don't want to make work for them, but equally, I'm strongly suggesting that we hyperlink everything that's going to be in the glossary anyway. It just needs to be an easier way to manage meetings. So that's just one point that you make up that one. But I think the last point was maybe where you want to start with this legal requirement on the decision groups.
Louise, did you want to clarify?
Thank you, Dawn. So to the best of my knowledge, there is no legal requirement around how we refer to opposition groups. But members may recall when we initially looked at this section, probably back in July, I think, of last year, we had this conversation at that moment, and you tasked us with going away and looking back in constitutions when we had more than one opposition group, because obviously our current constitution came into being when we had just the one opposition group, and therefore it was a simple way of we just talk about the opposition. So you tasked us with that, and we went back and looked at it insofar as we were able to go that far back with the vagaries of what documentation is now available to us. And this is the way that it was referred to when the council previously had more than one opposition group. So we brought that back to members, and at that point, if I may be misremembering it, but I thought that the consensus view was from the committee at that point was that we should continue to maintain that which we had before. So maintain this principal opposition and minority opposition groups to distinguish between the two. But clearly, if members are now of a different view, that's fine, and we can try and accommodate some changes.
My question is more about in a situation where they're all the same size, so it wouldn't be majority and minority opposition group. It would be about which is, I mean, this particular point on page 317, sorry, not 317, again, on page 31, is around who is the incumbent principal opposition and the additional resources that are available to them and all of that. You know, who's the first one to speak at full council, that kind of thing. And if there are other ways rather than someone being considered an incumbent because at an election, you know, you have a sort of a clean slate.
As I say, I'm not aware of there being any legal position on this. It's a matter for the council to determine. This was the way it was done. I'm not saying that is the way it should be done, you know, going forward at all, but that was the way in which the constitution was when we last had more than one opposition group. That was the precise phraseology used. As I say, if members wish to propose something different, for example, almost effectively that on an annual basis they each take it in turns where there's equality, then obviously you can propose that change, and it will then be for full council to make that decision.
I mean, I would propose to change that the principal opposition group, if they're of equal size, is the opposition group who represents the largest number of voters in that election, which is why it wouldn't be making sense to do it in mid-term, and you would continue having an incumbent mid-term. But in this situation where two groups are of the same size, the one that represents more voters, I would say, would be make more sense to be the principal opposition.
So I think that's one to take back. I'll be keen to understand what other local authorities have done around this. Louise, can we look into that to help give us a bit of a steer? I think that might be helpful as well. I think kind of benchmark what's happened. Councillor Ranford, apologies, you were indicating.
Yes, thanks very much. Actually, very good point. But if my memory goes back over 40 years in Hackney, as you probably know, and we've never had that situation. But obviously, we do have to cater for every likely situation. And it seems to me, I think we do have to take it back and discuss it further. It does seem to me that the proposal about votes could be a way of doing it. But then again, I think in the end, I think there has to be a form of wording which says it's to be negotiated. I think, but maybe we can't do that with the constitution. The reasons no better than wrong. But I do think they're probably not going to have trouble trying to actually detail it and then the criteria that we use. After overall, sometimes, as we know, Mrs. Thatcher, she was elected in her first election on less votes for Labour, she got more seats. So that's also something that needs to be thought about. I'm not disputing it, I'm just, the complications of going up with.
Yes, that's why I'm suggesting sort of benchmark, see what other councils are doing, go back to the next decision here. I think there's lots that we need to consider, but it's, you know, it's a point well raised in terms of Councillor Gordon, were you interposing?
Yeah, and I was just going to read this to, you know, when I've got, I mean, we're talking about sort of, you know, the council has pushed out to sort of, you know, particularly narrow and sort of, at the moment, such circumstances that hasn't happened in the last 40 years. But I mean, obviously, it's important we do have the Constitution providing for, you know, these sets of circumstances. And I think that maybe, you know, it would be a really good idea to benchmark what other local authorities do. Because, I mean, yeah, it must happen in some places. So, in terms of the equal number of votes, I mean, there would obviously be, you know, problems getting that. So I think that's maybe something that needs further consideration. Because, you know, if you're, and I'm still need to probably get to your point, so if you're looking at sort of total number of votes that part across the borough, because obviously individual ward councillors, the number of factors and how many votes they get. Yeah, so you know, I think there are, you know, there's a number of factors to balance here. So
I think
yeah,
that the point about benchmarking is a good point. However, I think we're if there's not a legal requirement for it to be the incumbent, I think it's good enough. So we've got enough brains in the room to be able to figure out a suitable alternative.
Yeah, oh, yes, I don't agree that. I do think we're all capable, competent to make a decision, but then Councillor Rathbone rightly made a point that actually shows that it's not as straightforward as you think. She said it's the amount of votes, but then Councillor Rathbone made a point about the amount of seats, so it's not straightforward as we would like or we would think, to just be able to say, okay, yes, we're going to do that. So when I maybe benchmarking is the wrong terminology, I think I did that earlier on in the day. I was here late to say cabinet, maybe that's why. That was the wrong language that I'm using. I thought let's find out if other local authorities are willing to have some sort of guidance, have a look at maybe let's have a good look at what the practice looks like, what other processes people are following. But ultimately, it's us here that will make a decision on this.
If I can just thank you. I suppose another point that I would make is that obviously we know that we have the opposition now, and we do have the on the committee that haven't attended, and so there would have to be some conversation with them with regards to any potential changes that are going to be made in the Constitution, which could potentially see in one way or another not going to make opposition do it. But as you say, it's about having those open conversations so that we can arrive at a document that caters for and can work properly in whatever situation we find ourselves. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Gordon?
I'm sorry, Chair, I don't want to be honest, but just another really quick point. Unless it's taken this instance, I think what Councillor Billy Levick is saying is if there are two opposition groups with the same number of seats, the starting point of these calculations, I don't think he was going any further than that in terms of the total votes, which obviously be, you know, yeah, but it's without the scope of this.
Yeah, it doesn't put the
Yeah, no, but I was making reference to the point that Councillor Rathbone made, saying about Margaret Thatcher, that saying that, you know, even if you're both got equal amounts of seats, it's more complicated than that. So depending on the formula you use or the format you use will depend on the outcome that you get. Because you made one point, but Councillor Rathbone made a point that actually counteracts what you're saying.
Well, I think what I'm saying is basically just represents the situation a larger number of councillors as the opposition group representing a smaller number of voters as a party votes. So yeah, the point of my making is that in a situation where there is two equal sized groups in terms of members, so in terms of what the law prescribes is the majority or the official opposition, it doesn't necessarily make sense that remains the case, that the official opposition is the one with the small number of votes, or whatever that left that we decide makes someone the official opposition.
I just wanted to ask another question. If there's an election and the equality of votes, you know, even after 7 recounts, you know, how would the result be decided?
So even in an election.
Yeah.
Toss of the coin.
Thank you. I'll wait, maybe. I think it's ignoring it.
It's ignoring the clown, yeah. Yes.
So we respond to that. Councillor Vinnie Lambert, were there some other points you wanted to raise?
A couple of other ones that I haven't seen addressed. One was on page 56, 7.10, around the vice chair of the scrutiny committee being a member of the larger opposition.
Councillor Vinnie Lambert, may I recommend that it's only your choice, that once you give the page number reference, that you just pause
That's very good.
to allow others to follow you to that, because we're all quite pedantic here, we all like to read it all over. So if you just pause and let everybody get to that page.
Page 46, 7.10. There's two points on here. One was, is there any particular reason or legal requirement that the vice chair of the scrutiny panel be a member of the larger opposition party? I'm thinking in practical terms, at the moment we have a situation where the larger opposition party doesn't take up that seat. And so is it possible for if that to be changed to just a member of the opposition in some way? And also in this situation it says the larger party, but I'm wondering if it could also say the opposition group. For example, if the group was made up of two parties, which I believe is permissible, then if that group be a group rather than party would take that seat.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Councillor Dawn, did you want to come in? I do wait with me, Louise, if you.
I could probably answer that one for you.
Yeah.
The first point is it should really say group rather than party. Yes, absolutely. And then the second point is that insofar as the vice chair being a member of the opposition party, my understanding is that has been a decision of this council to offer the vice chairmanship to a member of the opposition or an opposition group. However, the scrutiny panel, is one of those committees that has to be politically balanced. Therefore, if that means that through that political balance, only one opposition group is accorded a chair on the panel or any scrutiny commission, you cannot then just give the chairmanship over to another. As simple as so, for example, in this scenario, if the Conservatives don't take up their seat on the panel, can it simply be given to the Greens as the second opposition group? No, not if the rules of political balance don't allow us to do that.
Okay.
We could, if it's a situation as we find ourselves in, or we will find ourselves in, that when you work out the political balance, there is what I call an overage of seats. So because of the logistics and the way in which the mathematics works, with the number of members and the number of seats we have, we end up with a political group having technically more seats than they should have through the balance rules. Then clearly it is a matter for those groups to offer those excess seats over to the groups if they have then a lack of seats to meet their political balance. But that isn't something that has any bearing other than an offer by the groups as to those seats they want to give over. Because we are just constrained by the laws around political balance.
So potentially to redress the balance, the vice chair could be offered as one of those seats.
Technically speaking, if the scrutiny, I mean, I don't have the figures in front of me, but if the scrutiny panel is one, clearly where the Conservative group have a seat, let's use us as the real life example, the Conservative group don't wish to take up their seat on that panel, they could offer that seat to the Greens, but that, based upon our current figures, would then be one of their one seat, based upon their overage requirements, that they give over. There then would not be any further seats that the Conservative group would offer on any commissions or any other committee where they don't wish to take up a seat. Because the Green Party cannot have more than 5 seats on any of our council committees, commissions, etc.
But would we need to amend the constitution to change it from majority group?
It should clearly be a member of a majority group. Yes, I agree with that. But what the point I'm making is it cannot simply then just be passed from one group to another if they don't wish to take it up. It isn't as simple as that.
No, but if it was, yeah,
That's what Councillor Gordon.
Yeah, I mean, I've got, you know, I've got, I'm just declaring interest here. Obviously, I'm the chair of the panel. Yeah, I mean, I think as sympathy with asking these questions. I mean, what I would say is that the current scrutiny panel and the current sort of structure of scrutiny so that resulted in external review 5-6 years ago, Chair. So various recommendations are made, and I think part of this picture, I think, is that the scrutiny panel is slightly different from the other commissions in that it's chaired by vice chair as well as this vice chair position, which is so. You know, so I think there was this kind of reflection on constitution of the result of the review. So, you know, I'm certainly you know, got sympathy with having a look at it further, but I mean, I think there are those facts to take into account as well. So, okay, yeah.
Any other comments? It's quite frustrating. It's straightforward, like that's fine. We need this detailed work, fine, where we can make it as seamless and more straightforward as possible.
I have a couple more questions. Sorry to be sort of hogging at them, but
No apologies needed, Councillor Green of it. I will go to Councillor Gordon. Is it on the point that we were making before I go back to Councillor Green of it?
I've got some separate.
You've got them separate. Okay, well, that's all right. We'll finish with what this is what we're here for, and then we'll go to Councillor Gordon.
so on page 100, 17.6b. I just wanted, the more I kind of check a couple of things here, can a motion proposer, they can amend after an amendment without notice, or is that a notice they would have to give before they can amend if their motion is being amended? So some people are going to be.
So what is your question?
A councillor who's spoke on the motion, who's proposing motion, for example, if it's been amended, can they then subsequently try and submit another amendment and amendment to the amendment?
Well, because it's what it says here is right there that says that the councillor who's spoken on the motion may not speak again whilst it's in the subject of the debate, except, and then to go to B to move a further amendment, the motion has been amended since they last spoke. So it's your question, can they leave another amendment
Yeah.
on here, what's been amended? I think that's what that is saying, yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
Right, I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah.
And
Councillor, you called them, I really love it.
Yes.
but I was then related that. There was one question around 7.13.
Hold on, before we go on to Councillor Rathbone, did you want to come in on this particular point before you lose
Yes,
the train?
these are really good questions. The council in that testing. I think so. I mean, I haven't spotted that, and I read through, but then we need to sort this out because our rules currently are you can't write an amendment in meeting. It has to be given sufficient notice. That's
So maybe I'm going to thread it, and that's a separate. So if one group submits an amendment, then it could be another group submits an amendment. I think that's probably what it's speaking to, but those who've been previously submitted.
Yes, because the following section 17.7 is very clear about that. They get an amendment for motion moved by council, seconded by another. Council must be writing amendment for motion.
yeah. I think.
So I don't think we.
Could I mention that this might get a bit of a mistake, really, because this is clearly in contradiction to our usual processes, because that would mean that any councillor could move a motion from the floor of an amendment to a motion from the floor. And I mean, actually, that was allowed, and we have to have further delineation of what that might be, as it were, a substantive amendment or a minor amendment or whatever. So I think we probably need. I've got the answers.
But I think we're going to need to.
But in 17.7 it says that it must be in writing
So it contradicts.
and relevant to the motion, that must be either, so it's saying it has to be in writing, so then you can't make the suggestion of the amendment from the floor.
What is it?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
I guess what my reading of it was that a further amendment would be, say, one group had amended the motion, and then another group also had amended the motion. But the problem with that would be you'd be amending the original motion rather than the alter the motion. So I'm not entirely clear how that process would work. I mean, it's not something that I think we can do.
All right, we will highlight that
And finally,
So I just said, I was thinking it through. I think probably what it means is to speak to a further amendment. It's the movement, actually changing the substantive. So I think that perhaps if the working party would like to look at that.
Yeah, we will do that.
It's something like that.
and then the question, the last part of that is 7.13. It says after an amendment has been carried, the new substantive motion shall be read out. Sorry, on the next page, 101. 17.3. Says after an amendment has been carried, the new substantive motion should be read out before accepting any further amendments if there are none put to the vote. I don't think we've ever, after an amendment has been carried, read out the full amendment, because obviously that would take a lot of time. I'm assuming that that's saying only if there are further amendments to be made. So this kind of ties into that question of if there are further amendments, where would they arise from, and would those amendments apply to the new substantive motion, etc.
Well, I think it follows from 17.12, which talks about the amendment being carried. The motion is amended to take the place of the original motion, and then this becomes a substantive motion. So my reading of that would be that after what has happened in 17.12 has been completed, then in effect, you're right, then we should be in practice, the new amendment, the new motion as amended should then be brought to the council
As in read out.
as it read out in full, but.
I think maybe we should take that out.
Oh, yeah,
If I could just leap in, I think also need to be careful, because not every motion that we're talking about is a motion in the sense of a written motion as a councillor call for action type motion. A motion can be a motion that a member be not heard.
But you can't amend that motion, can you?
Well, I mean, obviously it would be different. That's a poor example in terms of an amendment, trying to amend that motion. No, because if people didn't want that to happen, then you couldn't amend it, because the corollary of that amendment would be that you carry on hearing them, which is in opposition to the amendment. But what I'm trying to convey is that we have motions that aren't written councillor call for action motions.
Yeah.
And the Constitution has to try and deal with all of it, which is why we talk about in 17.8, where those motions that are printed on the agenda, we require notice of amendments. And potentially also why, when we talk about in 17.7 about amendments being in writing, sometimes, again, it very much depends upon the circumstance. It's useful to have them in writing, because you could potentially, it's easier then for somebody to then read out, as opposed to trying to automatically follow what is being said and trying to make a note. So it's more helpful for whoever is chairing the meeting or taking the minutes of the meeting, have it in writing in front of them, so that they know that they've got the right wording, and everybody is clear then on what we're talking about. So all I'm trying to say is this part is trying to deal with lots of different types of motions in one, and hence why some of it may sort of seem a bit contradictory, or we may be saying certain different things in certain times. I think it's just trying to deal with every type of motion that we get, or could be put, and could be amended or not amended, and how you deal with it.
Fair enough.
And I could just say, that's not to say I don't think we can look at that. We will absolutely look at that and see if we can't figure out how we can try and make it clearer. It's just that I think if you look at many constitutions, how motions are explained is not necessarily very straightforward at all, because they're complicated.
Point taken, and I suppose what we're trying to do is make a very complicated process simplified and very practical. But in doing that, we've got the ramifications, we've got the protocol, and what we can and can't do. So I appreciate that. So the working group can maybe take that away and continue to look at that. Councillor Rathbone and Councillor Gordon, and I'm going to go back to Councillor Greenlow.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I completely agree with Louise, if I was to look at what she's saying, but yeah, there are kind of two motions. One is where it's a general motion, such as you give the wind rate, for instance. But some of our motions, there's a big preamble which is not actually the motion, and this is one of my bugbears about some of the motions that have been put forward. You just effectively the speaker would only be reading out the last three lines, which is just a council now commits itself to, or the council agrees to take action on. It's not the rest of it, because that will take a lot more time. Well, I just think actually that needs to be made clearer. But I wouldn't mind seeing some word that actually said about these preambles. They are just illustrative or descriptive preambles. I'm looking at Louise now, rather than you know. So and the motion part is very, very clear. But I do think that Councillor Lovelace wanted to draw attention to it, that we don't do this thoroughly. And although it does take time, I think it is actually important to read out. When I've been chair of meetings, I certainly do read them out, because inevitably people do get a bit lost in it. So to make it more democratic, so that everybody can understand it, because by reading it out, everybody knows where you stand.
I think that's a fair point. Louise, did you want to come back on that particular point before I bring everybody else in?
No, I certainly take the point, and I would agree with Councillor Rathbone that when you look at our motions, what is actually the motion element takes up probably about 1/12 of the total content of what is put forward as a motion.
Absolutely.
And you know, the preamble actually isn't part of the motion that is technically passed. You know, we do include it in the minutes, and we would publicise it, but the motion is actually the active call for action, not the preamble explanation of why we want to do it. So I think, you know, I think it's potentially something that we need to look at more generally in terms of focusing on the actual active element of our motions and not the preamble. I understand fully why councillors want to include the preamble, because obviously it sets the scene and it explains it. But it certainly in the time that I've been with the council, though, that preamble part are getting longer and longer.
Thank you. Councillor Gordon, do you want to?
Yeah, just really briefly on this. I think these, you know, I think we could do with as much clarity as possible on this section, because obviously, you know, council meetings are a dynamic process. So I don't know whether there is, sorry, maybe whether there is any way of sort of separating out the process into the different types of motions, so there is complete clarity. And, you know, we do, obviously, we're doing catching up with Abington and what the actual motion is.
Yes, I think that's a fair point. I think then, yeah, there needs to be more explanation of what a motion is, can be, per se, before you can start describing the process of it. I think so. We sort of need one step back, because I suppose we're trying to simplify the process, but we're making the assumption that people have an understanding or awareness of the process that we're trying to simplify. Which people say, I want to feed myself for that. So I think we need to scale it. I think we need to take a bit more about what a motion is, then go into the motion, then separate it out, and then hopefully that will make things a bit clearer. Louise, would you like to come back in? If you don't have a particular comment, I'm going to go back to Councillor Lambert.
No, as I said, we're happy to take that away at the Constitution Officer Working Group and look at that part again.
Thank you. Councillor Lambert.
I am aware I'm taking up quite a lot of time here, so I mean, just
I'm a very generous chair.
Very generous chair, thank you. 107, Rule 25.1. I know this has been amended to say that when members are speaking, they don't have to stand, they can remain seated. But it also says here that the council will make a point of order from first explanation. Whilst the members are speaking, they must stand and remain seated to address them. I'll just.
So I missed the page. Sorry, 107. Yeah, 107. So yeah, I guess we make this more inclusive by saying that councillors may remain seated. But yeah, the wishing to speak, I think generally, sort of get the speaker's attention by raising a hand or something like that. I haven't seen any councillors generally stand up to speak. They don't think one board or anything, but anyway, I think that's it for me.
I think usually for points of order, councillors have stood. Again, that's something that has only been majority of time has been observed. So I'm thinking about councillor Adams even making the request for the meeting to be extended. It usually is, it's almost like a minister, but yeah, there's usually, yeah, so again, obviously it's down to whether members feel it's appropriate that you know, in order to request to make a motion that on a point of order word that should say we will stand. Yeah. That's why we could add a sentence to say, you know, obviously, not obviously, but something that says that where possible, if somebody is able to stand, because trying to we are doing which we are doing, and that's why we do that in speakers brief.
Sorry, I missed something here. I mean, certainly when I was speaker, everybody had to stand up and speak.
Yes.
Then if they're sitting down, they're told to stand up. If they don't stand up, then they're ignored.
Yes.
So this is saying may remain seated whilst the president meeting.
Yeah, so we did have a discussion on that. I can't remember which one of the meetings, that one of the meetings, and it was January. It was the January meeting, thank you, where it was agreed that in order to be I think it's a combination of discussion that were around the acoustics, the mics, and also to be inclusive. I think there's another point as well.
But also highlights the point, I think, where in the original text it said that councillors must remain seated while the councillors are speaking. And yeah, if people want to sort of that so that's been moved.
I definitely don't think this is right. It surely has to be something to the effect that when the mayor and council indicate they wish to speak, and the speaker agrees, they must stand.
Unless they're unable to.
Unless
They are unable to give so, or the person with his duty. I would recommend that caveat only because if we now do this, it might be more confusing. Some people stand and some people not, some people not knowing what to stand and what to do. So I wonder if it's better that, you stand unless you're unable to, or for personal reasons at any given time you choose not to. And I think the majority of people will know that they will and should stand, and if you don't or can't stand. I think
Deputy, if I can just add to that, one of the other reasons that we were proposing that we effectively do away with the requirement to stand to speak, other than inclusivity, is also because now that we are live streaming our meetings, we do have issues where members are stood and the microphone's picking up what is being said, particularly where members of the council, councillors, cabinet members direct themselves away from the speaker to address the room. So it's partly for inclusivity reasons, but also partly because if we are going to live stream our meetings and have people joining us remotely, we need to make sure that they can hear what's going on. And the closer people are to the microphone, the better the sound quality and the audio quality is then for those who are listening through other means. But as I say, it is a matter for council to decide whether or not it wants to effectively permit people to do away with the requirement to stand in its entirety or not. But those were the reasons why we were proposing that we do away with the requirement to stand at council meetings.
So I don't often agree with you, Eloise. I don't think I get much opportunity to disagree with you. I think, though, when you're referring to the mic, I think what you'll find actually is if you are a certain distance away from the mic, they work better than if you are closer. And unless I would argue, it's been around too many doors for too long, isn't it? I would say that actually if you're too close to the mic, you're often muffled.
Yes.
So I'm not sure that people standing and being away from the mic is the issue. It's more maybe people being aware of the audience and making sure if you turn to address the speaker, which is the protocol, that you're projecting your voice and making sure that you are aware of the mics of that at all times, whether you're looking directly at the mic or to the side to the speaker, that you're audible. I think that's more the issue more than the proximity of the mic, in my humble opinion. Councillor Rathbone, I saw you indicating.
Yeah, I'm really, I can't believe that I'm actually defending this, but I do think it's really important, the democratic, and I agree with the microphone thing as well. Having actually, when Tim Shields was here, we actually did a lot of tests. I forget now if you were here, but it is what the chair was saying, you have to be standing some way away. We actually tried to train houses not to do that, which is still conceivable right close up and being muffled. But that's the way those mics are actually supposed to work, apparently. But on the standing part, the variety of reasons people stand at meetings to speak. One is that the speaker is in full control of the meeting by saying, only, Councillor Smith, yes, and when if somebody else is trying to interrupt, you're not standing, Councillor Smith is standing. It's a democratic function. Secondly, it's so that members of the public in the gallery and the media can actually see the person standing and know that is the person that is speaking and no one else. And then thirdly, that other members in the chamber are aware that who exactly it is. Now, I know that we get to know one another, but nevertheless, that's a democratic function. So that always there's only one person standing who has the right to speak until such time as the speaker or the time runs out. And the speaker says, "Please now sit down." And I actually had a situation when I was speaker where, without going into the details, several people were actually out of their seats and shouting at me and one another. And I told them to sit down, and then they all started to stand up in their seats. And I said, "No one stands up unless I say so." And I think that's basically the rule, and I had to bring it to order in that way. So I do think that it is important, actually, the standing out part, although it can be quite irritating, I know, to some people. Maybe we have to have a caveat, as it were, brackets, which is unless there is some particular medical or other reason why they should be seated. And indeed, we have had that with Councillor Amyhurst, who couldn't walk hardly walk at one time, using a wheelchair. He sat in his wheelchair. So, but that, I think that's a fairly easy thing to do.
Yes, Chair, if I can say, yes, so we will, I think we might like to mix the argument from my learning friend. But, no, yes, we're happy to change it back, but with the caveat that's addresses, the potential for someone with a disability or any technical particular reason.
Yes, it's definitely problems.
I think that's also very for the rule around the speaker sounding to bring the meeting through the silence as well. Obviously, the speaker might also on the
Yes. Yes, and we can practice.
Yes, so definitely. Yeah, that's, you're right, Councillor. I mean, in the item 25.2, that's what I did. I stood up and I said, I am the only person that is allowed to stand up here, not you, sit down. So, again, hopefully that will never arise ever again, but if it does, then it becomes important for order to be reestablished very quickly in the meeting.
This helps people as well to follow the format and flow of the meeting as well. Okay, so I think that's a clear signal for that to change back with the caveat of inclusivity, that people are clear that if they can't stand for any reason that they don't have to, and that includes the speaker. Yeah, thank you. So back to Councillor Gunning-Lovett.
The point that I got a bit muddled on and lost on earlier, and I've actually located the issue now. It's basically a contradiction between what is on page 32, 3.7e, saying that rights and responsibilities specific to non-executive members, and that they can ask for question or report to cabinet. That seems to me in contradiction with what's on page 117, 5.7, which says the leader of the opposition, of any opposition group, may attend and speak at cabinet. And it just seems a bit strange that it specifies that it's only the leader of an opposition group who can attend and speak at cabinet, when members of the public can also attend and speak at cabinet approved. And I assume that all members of any group are also members of the public. So, yeah, there's just a bit of a contradiction there. If a member is not a leader of an opposition group, wanting to speak or report, as set out in 3.7e, does that contradict what is set out in 5.7 in part 4, section B?
Did you want to raise any other points, or do you want some
I'll
others to come over?
I'll leave it at that.
Leave it at that. Okay. Dawn or Lee, did you want to either respond to that or take that away as part of the working group to come back?
I think of what I'd say in the first instance is that I don't think they contradict. My view would be that they don't contradict each other because what 5.7 does is very clearly say that the legal option of the opposition group chaired by the scrutiny and the speaker maintains the general power particularly and allows those office holders as well to be able to attend. And then just to take your point further, councillor in
Can I pause you your train of thought, Dawn, if that's all right? I suppose, I wonder if that caveat's been, because it's a meeting in public, not a public meeting. And there's a distinction between two, so sometimes things are going to be slightly different because it's a meeting held in public rather than a public meeting. That's just my reflection, that may or may not be the case as to why that is in there like that. But back to you, Dawn, probably
that's fine. And then, so with regards to the members attending as members of the public,
Or as
members, non-executive members, that I would have to look at. Yeah. Yeah, that has raised the question, which I think I'm not sure if Louise has anything further to add about. And she doesn't like to ask the person who reported that and introduce the presentation.
maybe it's just not clear the difference between.
Yeah. Yes, yes, so it's about making that explicitly clear. Yeah, you're absolutely right, yeah. So we ask for the report to the cabinet, so that affects something that has been published, is publicly done, and so therefore.
Most appropriate.
So we can, it's about 3.7, councillor, on page 32.
Yeah.
I think for me, the distinction that's trying to be made is any councillor can attend cabinet and ask a question, but that asking the question is not speaking to an agenda item.
To a report.
Or to a report. That's the distinction.
So in the page 107. 117.
117 at 5.7, if I've got the reference correct, it talks about the leader of any opposition group may attend and speak at any meeting of cabinet. That isn't the same thing as asking a question. That's the distinction. So other councillors can go to cabinet and ask a question, but that is slightly different to generally speaking.
That makes sense.
Councillor Wright.
Yeah, I don't know whether the words at the discretion of the chair should be used in this situation because it seems a bit loose. In other words, leader of the opposition can turn up and say, I want to speak. Well, no, I think there has to be an order to it. And so I think it has to be surely at the discretion of the chair. That doesn't mean they can't speak, but what it does mean is they're going to be also in then wanting to speak. Don't know if that makes sense, Louise.
Well, it certainly makes sense. I mean, yes, clearly as a matter of good chair, if for example, the speaker wants to attend and says, well, I want to talk about this particular topic. Well, you'll wait until you get to that topic on the agenda and call the person to speak. You wouldn't necessarily go, well, you can speak first, and then we've got all these other agenda items to get to, and then we'll get to the item that you wanted to talk about, but you've already spoken. That to me is just good chairmanship.
Yeah.
Right, so just, if that was your final point, just so that we can move through. Are members content that we've discussed part 1, part 2 and part 3 of the constitution? Any other members want to make any comments on those sections before we pass through? Okay, let's go to Councillor Gordon and Councillor Ragbone.
Yeah, so it's kind of different parts now, but yeah, I just have one general point really about the references to, for example, cabinet decisions. I mean, this phrase appears in many places, but page 63 of the Constitution about cabinet decisions being within the policy framework. There are other references to the policy framework. I don't think policy frameworks actually defined. And I think it really helped if it was, because it's part of the and also, I would sort of advocate, if it is defined, is that it should be relatively sort of dynamic process, because obviously if we bring in sort of new strategy and policy frameworks, we bring in new strategies, for example, updates of the anti-racist strategy, and that is included in the policy framework, you know, so decisions are made within the restraints of these, you know, that framework. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does make sense, and I think so. We have had a discussion within the group which reflected that as well.
Yeah.
So it's something that we could, I think we need to put our heads around again to further strengthen, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I mean, it's quite important. You know, it's quite an important provision. Yeah, it's the foundation stone of the Constitution about about decisions being made in the policy framework.
Any other comments or queries on point 1, part 1, 2 and 3 of the Constitution? So in the main document, we're starting from page 1, part 2 in the hard copy, 24, page 24, and part 3 in the paper copy is starting from page 35.
So, Chair, I put solutions to something the council development said.
Is that a resolution point? Is that relevant to part 1, 2,
No,
and
it's
3?
part
So let's just do that. So just so we're moving forward in a systematic way. I appreciate this, Chair. I let Councillor really love that take points from different parts, but just because the officers that are making notes that have to go back to the working group, I just think we go back to the order. So I'm not hearing any more comments for part 1, 2 or 3. Okay, so let's move on to part 4 of the Constitution. It starts at page 79. Any comments on A, B, C, D? Now, Councillor Ragbone, I believe this week wants to come in on procedure.
Yes. Some of the went to address. Councillor Billy Lovett raised on page 102, item 1718H to implement guillotine procedure. I think point D of that is actually what it refers to, and I don't think the implement the guillotine procedure is necessary or should be changed, because when you put the question, you've finished. There's no further debate. Nothing else can happen. Once it's agreed, the question is being put. You can't. That's the finish. That's what the guillotine. But a guillotine, I think there might be a sense of guillotine can also be just finished. That's it. No vote. Nothing like that. But we don't. If you read through, you can't really do that without having to change our constitution. So I think probably the word right to draw attention to it. Whether I for the working party, sorry, whether it's just removed that completely or beef up the question now and put that into the agenda transfer in, something like that.
Thank you.
And that's helpful. But certainly we don't want people to be thinking that guillotine means that councillors who put trouble actually books to give it to, really hope that. No books, so that's a challenge.
Any more comment? Councillor Gordon, you want to come in?
Yeah, really briefly, page 134. I was going to query the reference about the joint commission for grey areas, because I'm putting found out I was
If I can just interject there, it does still exist.
yeah, no, yeah, it says the reconstitution for 21, so we'll need to. We can do it.
Any other comments on the section?
Oh, we are part of it.
We're on part 4.
Yes, okay. It's just a simple question. It's obvious that on page 137, item 2.1C, just an email address. I'm just looking at the obviously we need to have email addresses.
Yes, or anywhere where there is something that says insert link or email address, that will all be added at the point at which we're doing the hyperlinks.
Yeah, I think it would be Louisa. Just picking it up. And then further down 3 in the same page, 3.1 will be published within X days of decision being taken. I think that's probably because we might publish it but I guess we have to specify something about it. Probably it's fine, isn't it? But
Well, normally I know my governance team try and publish the day after cabinet, or in some cases even the evening of, depending on what time cabinet finishes. So I think it will probably be within. We will specify something that's sensible, like 2 days. But normally they do publish the day after cabinet sits.
yes, very good. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you could say 3 days, or you think that would be too late. I just think if there's any sort of technical glitch or anything you've got.
I mean, even with that, as Louise said, to publish the same night as the critical recording.
Yes.
And yeah, we've got particular decisions where the organisation needs to move quickly. So it's about that being it's
Okay, so you think 2 days, but I suppose I'm just thinking that if we don't, well, I just think if there's any time an unknown known happens,
Yeah.
and it isn't within 2 days, then you're in a situation where you're not meeting.
Yeah, no, hopefully, because we have ways of doing this, which if we can't use there are other ways in which that the team can that we need that criteria.
Thank you. Okay, so we're just remembering that hyperlink, email addresses, and particular dates that need to be specified on what the team will pick up once everything's been confirmed. Any other comments on part 4? Councillor Rappo?
Yeah, just to follow up on that as well, because I was just thinking another form of words which meant didn't restrict it, but actually I think right reads, I think we do have to specify whether it is 2 or 3 days, because it actually is bound up with the expiration of 5 days after publication. If you have got a very important decision that needs to be made very quickly, it is a challenge. You certainly need to, as it were, minimise it to make sure that people are aware once it's published and you've got the 5 days. And if the decision is heard in the meeting, that gives you an extra 2 days. But you have to got 7 days or 10 days. So I want to make a sense of it, but it's just making sure that everything doesn't go down because it wasn't there within certain limits and times.
Can't see any more indications of part 4. Okay, so we're going to move on to part 5, which is finance and contract rules, and that is page 163 in your printed agenda. So draft copy, it will be 141, but in the hard printed copy, it's 142. 163, you're printed your hard copy. Any comments or queries? That's the outline.
Yeah, I was, sorry, Chair, it's just a general comment.
No problem.
I've been reading through, the things in it which I thought, well, this is not the way things happen commercially. But I just thought, well, no, this is a local government body, and local governments are often different from the rules. So I just found it very difficult, just to be saying, very difficult to follow through. But as far as it went, as far as I can understand it, I think it's fairly clear. But I'm not an expert on these things, so.
I think so. I think it went through
Yes,
well.
it did.
And, you know, any of the technical terms, the hyperlinks anyway, in the glossary. Councillor Thornton, did you have any comments?
Yeah, it's obviously, a lot of legislative framework behind this. Yeah, that's most pressure on this. I think it's, you know, it's really useful to transparency to have it helping us.
And are the working groups happy to go away and look at this as if they are not experienced, knowledgeable officers and think about where the hyperlinks might need to be in the glossary and the great understanding of the result, so much technical language in this? I think that's my only caveat in this, that this will need. Was that in the, so it's in the legal, in the, finance and contract rules, I'm just saying, if they find it a little bit more. Because there's so much technical language in there. I just think it's one of those sections that we just need a little bit more, and we've got to make the assumption that everyone's coming into it cold rather than everyone that's coming in.
I think it's getting the balance right, really, without it being, overly, but yes, yeah,
I understand that we don't want every sentence to be a hyperlink.
yeah, but to be careful that we get the balance right. The financial procedure rules were, not a set of rules that we ourselves as the office of working group, suggested in the amendments to that will take final finance. So we would really need to work with more appropriate.
But I suppose that's my point. Finance colleagues are immersed in
Yes,
this,
yeah, definitely.
so they may not be able to ascertain as easily what might need explaining. I know for myself, with someone who's immersed in text and language and the protocol, she said, you know, sometimes I have to remind officers myself to that acronym. So I think that I might be one that seems to go back and have a little bit more, just a bit more sense check, because it reads really well and I think they've explained it really well. It just might have a bit more of a you know, where one tendered, you know, you need to understand contracts and tendering. It's,
I do understand what's being said, but I think the problem is that there are a set of rules that are prescribed and written in such a way that I think we would need the help of finance colleagues, but I do appreciate.
But we're not saying change. We're not saying change the form. We're not saying change the format or even the language. We're just saying I think there needs to be more explanation around the language and it's going to use. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, keywords.
Yeah. So Councillor Green, I'll be indicating, then you still want to come in, and then I'll bring it up.
No, I was just going to ask if there was a differentiation between things that could be hyperlinks and maybe separate. So that did like that might be different things. As you were saying about jumping around between glossary.
But I suppose I was maybe the hyperlinks might work better because it's
Yes.
The link is where you are at this time, even if you put like, so we'll go down and put that in, you might end up on a lot of notes on the UK, but, you know, thank you, because it's, well, that's what we're here, always trying to think of different ways to make this accessible. Councillor Crabtree?
I think the main hyperlinks actually would be to the relevant legislation, you know, sections of the, I'm just looking through it to see where I think, I take on all what you say about things like tendering, I think that will come in there. But there's quite a lot of references in here, section, like section 128, local government act, section 114, and I think that's where the hyperlinks are really needed, and that will actually provide quite a lot of context and information people need.
It will, but I'm not sure how accessible that those legislations are. So I think that any language that we can explain might help to guide people in it. But I think go away and have a look at it. It will just like have a read, and we can come back to it. Councillor Rappo?
Yeah, I mean, in pages 177, 178, we do have, as your definition of terms, business and so forth. And several contract managers. So I think that's quite. I think that was quite useful. So, where I'm a school governor, we started a glossary at the back of the minutes, and it's grown every meeting.
Yeah,
It's grown.
Yeah.
Education, but it is everybody's found it really useful to know. So, I mean, for instance, I would say that CEDA, the system that you use, the main financial management system, should be described a bit more. I mean, it does actually say in 8.5, authorised through the Council's financial management system, but that's on page 151. It's mentioned throughout the document. It's things like that, I think, which you might just need a bit more explanation for people, just to help them. So, I mean, a hyperlink to something or to see the system or something. Yeah, it's not too technical, but and I don't know, maybe I'm being a bit big, but even to hyperlink to VAT, what exactly VAT is. What percentage is it? Do you know what percentage VAT is? Isn't it? So just simple things like that, which helps a bit general readers, doesn't it? People are trying to do. Obviously, not too much.
Look, please.
I just, I guess a note of caution. If we are, if the suggestion is that we are hyperlinking to external websites for information, we do have to bear in mind that we don't control those websites, and websites change frequently and often. And certainly for myself, one of my biggest bugbears is when I'm given a hyperlink to a website and you go there and you get 404 error, this page no longer exists.
Yeah.
And it is incredibly frustrating as a user. So we did today in our constitution group have a discussion around where we reference legislation and section numbers. Do we then include a hyperlink externally to that section of text? The only place where we can guarantee that legislation will be up to date is behind a paywall. So if you don't have an account, you can't access it. And again, that's incredibly frustrating when you're given links to things, because clearly not everyone will have an account to a third-party company that happens to provide a service which is to keep all the legislation up to date. The government has a website which contains all the legislation, but quite frequently you will go to a piece of legislation there and it will say something like, there are amendments outstanding to this act, which have not yet been updated here. And then, of course, if somebody is looking at that section and then potentially looking at the wrong wording or not up-to-date wording, and then also as a council, we then start being told that we've done something wrong because the legislation says something that it did 3 amendments ago, that can get quite frustrating. So those are just my cautionary notes.
That's certainly something to consider.
Yeah.
Yes.
So could I suggest then that we do kind of go back to, I think, Ross really. At the back, which we can update, of course, ourselves on our own site. So actually, that's a really good point, Louise. Thanks very much for that.
No problem. I think it's potentially my nature. Things that I can control, I'm more than happy to do. Where I'm relying on somebody else to keep their information up to date or not change their website, I get incredibly nervous.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point. So I think we'll have to think about that if you wanted to reference the legal frameworks, to give people that background knowledge and reading, but then it's not going to be updated. I don't know if it can go to the main government website. We'll have to think about it. There's a main website, but then people might have to navigate the site for themselves.
I think that's not.
All right, so we'll leave that with the group to come back and say if we're going to include external links or not. Yeah, we'll change what links we can include, which or what I think include. Yeah. All right, so I can't see any more implications apart from. Okay, let's move on to part 6, which is public participation, one of the important parts, of course. So in your hard copy, that should be starting from page 231 to 259. Can I just check on page 233, point 1.5? Yeah, it says that people can attend the meeting remotely must concern themselves familiarising some of the protocol of attending the meeting online. It might sound obvious that when people want to attend online, and I believe the council will send them an email, the link, is the protocol in that email, and they are told in that email that they do that. Because I'm thinking once they join online, there's nothing then to tell them there's protocol that they need to check. So I'm just thinking, is there a step before they join online in the email exchange that tells them to look at the protocol? So that's on 1.5, page 233. I suppose I'm just thinking of a scenario where someone joins online and they do something inappropriate or they're not meant to do. You told me about the protocol, and they're going to say, well, I didn't know that the protocol was checked and follow. And it's just making sure in that email exchange when officers are sending the link to someone who wants to join the meeting remotely, right, then it sets out, please ensure you read the protocol of joining online before attending the meeting.
Okay,
Actually.
If I might, Mr. Chair, just to say, generally speaking, for these sort of people who are joining remotely, particularly around licensing subcommittee, people who are attending will have the link sent to them together with the protocol,
Right.
and that protocol is also read out at the start of the meeting. so that people have a chance. And it's also very often it's included in the agenda, the published agenda details. So there are a number of ways, number of routes.
That's really helpful, but can the working groups go away and think about all of the meetings now, because we are now having so much more hybrid meetings, so it's not just about licensing, it's about full council, for example, it's about cabinet, where we're trying to encourage more public engagement and use the benefits of working in hybrid. Can the working group just go and make sure that across the board works for meetings that protocols followed, not just licenses where they're used to having lots of people attending remotely? Any other comments or contributions on that?
I had one question around exempt information.
Yes.
And it's just not necessarily very clear who determines whether the public interest in maintaining an exemption outweighs public interest in disclosing the information.
Did you say when that was, or did I miss that?
It didn't say, because I'm looking at an old version, so I'll just double check. I think it was 8.3, previous one.
Or you can say whether it is in the draft.
Oh, sorry, so it's in part 6. So we'll see exempt information, but it was 8.3, but that might have changed. This is January.
It's now on page 216 of the actual document. Page 237 of the agenda.
Did you want to repeat, just repeat your point?
Okay,
That
so
would
that
be really
was-
slow it, because
I think that might have been, addressed in this draft, sorry, where it's broken out to confidential information needs, information that's been asked by the government department, but I'm wondering if there was also exempt information. Oh yeah, exempt information here. Yeah, just sorry, 8.3, that is halfway into that information is only going to sort of automatically case the public interest. It's just not very clear who makes that determination from that point.
Okay. Noted, and I'll just say to Dawn and Louise, anytime you want to come in, please indicate, otherwise I just want to keep the flow of the meeting. Any other comments or queries on that part? So I can't see an indication, so I'm going to return to part 7, which is elected mayor councillors, which will be page 260 to 319 in your latest hard copy.
Yeah, I don't, sorry, Chair.
Councillor,
On page 261 of the agenda, is there a statement that says that committee council was the director of the mayor, but directly elected mayor is the councillors. I don't think that's how.
It's the code of conduct.
Yeah.
Deputy Mayor Rambo, if I can try and explain, if it's talking about the reference to the council code of conduct, we were trying to avoid with that code of conduct having to continually refer to the directly elected mayor and councillors. So when the standards committee looked at that, the approach was that we would set out that for the purposes of that code, where we're talking about a councillor, it includes the directly elected mayor. So that's included in a definition at the start to say that that's the approach we've taken.
Yeah,
Councillor Blackburn.
I appreciate that. It's just that in legality, it doesn't, the word councillor not cover mayor. Mayor is not a councillor.
That's exactly what I'm saying. So it says for the purposes of this code of conduct.
Yes,
It's not saying it more widely. It's not saying in legislation. All it is saying is for the purposes of this code of conduct, where we use the term councillor, we mean the directly elected mayor, elected councillors, and indeed co-opted members.
I wonder if we change it to means, we say includes. Because when you use the word means, you can't use the word to describe the word. So when you use the word mean, the interpretation of using that word is that you are describing what the entity or people are or represent. But if you say include, it means you are talking about councillors and also other elected members or people involved in the council. So I would suggest you say a councillor includes in this instance elected mayor and cooperative members.
or some wording that says for the purposes of this particular section.
Yeah, that's what I did. Yeah, I did say for the purpose of this section. That page 261. How does that sound, Louise? I can't see your face, but I imagine your brain's kicking over.
Well, immediately preceding the definition, because it does say for the purposes of this code of conduct. So I don't know if it potentially is just me then, but it seems quite clear to me that this is talking about this part of the document, this code of conduct. So section A only of part 8 of our constitution. The definition for the purposes of this code of councillor is all of those people named. If you prefer to change it to includes councillors, the directly elected mayor and co-opted members, then I don't have a problem with that. But I can't really add anything more to the conversation really on that point.
Yeah, that's right. I thought I could hear your mind ticking over there. I think if I said a councillor includes or a councillor will include. I think because even though you think it's clear, two of us as elected members clearly didn't make still clear with that. So I just think the general public who are less close to this than we are may get a bit confused about that. Only because I've often been called the MP of Hackney, sometimes called the mayor, and having to explain to people what your elected position and who you are is a constant thing. So I think if people then think that they are the councillor, we don't want to confuse things anymore. So thank you, you said that. So no need or point to labour that. Any other questions or comments on this part? Elected mayor and councillors.
On page 264, it has a breakdown. This is about allowances. Breakdown what happens if there's one or two opposition groups. However, obviously, we're still trying to cover all circumstances. There could potentially be more opposition groups in the future. We want to cover that off. And then on page 265, there's reference to mayoral advisor. I believe the terminology that just changed to full council. And it's sort of a query on the earlier point that the mayor can appoint as many mayoral advisors as they wish. I guess there's just a question around how is that sort of budgeted for or considered more broadly? Is that could the mayor appoint a dozen?
Well, the mayor's probably spoken about budget, but it's consultation with.
Deputy Mayor Bramble, if I can. So the scheme, the member scheme, allowances scheme that you have here is a scheme that was approved by council in January. It approves the scheme annually, and that approved scheme is then inserted into the constitution. So it's a separate document that doesn't necessarily go through a constitutional approval, we're required to include it, and you update it annually. So as and when we get to a point where we have more than two opposition groups, that will be dealt with in the update to the annual update to the member allowances scheme. And obviously, because this document was the one that was approved in January, it precedes the change to deputy cabinet members from mayoral advisors to deputy cabinet members. So that's why that reference is still there. When the scheme is updated again, it will change that terminology.
The number of groups could change mid-term though, couldn't it?
It could change mid-term, but because this allowance scheme is updated annually, and if we need to update it again, then a further report is taken to full council. There's no need for an individual scheme to cover each and every potential combination of how many opposition groups there might be in the future within the document, in my opinion.
I assume we can update the terminology for that role, but otherwise there won't be any allowance available from the newly named role, or is it a newly named role?
Oh, you mean the mayoral advisors? Yeah. Well, that's, yeah, that's a very good point, but they have now been changed to deputy cabinet members, yeah.
Yes, but because the change has come through the Constitution, and the changes have been noted through the Constitution, the connection is there in terms of this current allowance scheme, that where it says mayoral advisors, it's to be read as deputy cabinet members.
Right, thank you.
I
I just noticed maybe it shouldn't be like this, but on page 264, it's just when the council formed two opposition groups, the first opposition group being the first opposition group being second opposition group, there's no second group with. Is that an important thing, or doesn't logically follow, does it? So I think on the next page 6, we can show the next page. It does.
In fact, page 285.
Yeah, page 285, I want to change.
It's,
You should know.
I don't know, there isn't allowance. I don't know.
Is that correct? Was it an allowance or did we?
Well, this, I believe this is how it's been like that, and this is what, the total allowances in it, and what I provided for. Because officers will only state what the SROs are, they don't state what they are, that's done independent of.
Yes.
Council.
Yeah, so I just want to make just an error or something.
So what officers can do is go back to check the clarity that everything that should be stated and the amounts are stated correctly. That's what they can do, rather than that they wouldn't be able to answer directly. Any other questions or comments?
Okay, so
One question around the member parental leave.
Yes.
If we approved a change to this to say that we wouldn't need to approve individual members' parental leave, could we just do it once now and then not have to do it again in full meetings as very front by the name and last?
I was going to say,
Yeah.
yeah, no, but I think you have to by law.
yeah.
As an individual one, but could we not do it on mass within this institution?
no.
Okay.
It's the legislation that it should be drafted, yeah. Very, very, very clumsy, just inappropriate. You wouldn't expect, in a company, you would get people around to have a staff and, you know, so-and-so's taking maternity or paternity leave or parental leave or guardian leave. Yes, it's just unfortunate that it's just legislation, unfortunately, councillor Taylor.
Sorry, Chair, which item are we referring to?
Sorry, but in terms of, around page, 271. Brent.
So we'll now move on to part A, which is officers, and that will be pages 320 in your latest hard copy. Or in the draft copy will start from 299.
My advice, I think, is that's really helpful. Isn't it? Be quite a lot of work to put together.
Thank you for the feedback. I think it's worth me saying, and possibly that's obvious to everybody on the committee, that if there are name changes or limited changes that we use, we might just make those changes. Yes, come to us as the Constitution Committee or indeed Dr. Wood have to go to the council. That's that. Yeah. Thank you. I think all this is agreed with us. Yes. Yeah. The members like a few more minutes on this. So let's move on to item 9, which is codes of protocol. So in your latest hard copy, it will be page 349, but in the draft copy, it will be 328.
Deputy Mayor Bramble, if I could just remind members of the committee that in respect to the Planning Code of Practice and the Licensing Code of Practice, the codes that are inserted are our current codes. Officers are working on revisions to those codes. We're much further advanced with the Planning Code of Practice and the Licensing Code, but they will need to go through a separate, once the work is concluded, that has a separate approval channel. So the Planning Code of Practice has to be signed off by the corporate committee rather than sort of a constitution committee and then full council. So just to remind you that, as I know we've mentioned it at earlier meetings, that work is ongoing with regards to updating those, but they have their own procedure to go through.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? For the last part of the impact is the appendices. Louise, is there anything that you wanted to speak about on the appendices or
other than just to draw your attention to, I think we'd had previous discussions around the new format for the terms of reference for the committees to ensure that there's more information included for them within their specific terms of reference. But obviously, so you'll see that now in action with what is in Appendix 3, which is where you'll find all of the terms of reference of the various committees. So it now splits it out into headings like functions, quorum, membership, how it's chaired, whether substitutes are or are not permitted, what their order of business will be, who can go, where we generally hold those meetings, and can you ask questions at those meetings, just to provide more of a one-stop shop approach for the terms of reference.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or anything, yes, colleagues? So there are no further comments tonight. Colleagues to agree the recommendations in the report as set out under the caveat that the things that we've discussed, let's go back to the working group, will be ratified and looked at in the working group that will be presented back to us maybe later date. Colleagues agree?
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
So before I go on to the last agenda item, just an update on the engagement. Things would be helpful. Forgive me if I've missed an email buried under my kind of just 1,000 emails in my inbox. But just we were going to have a COPS plan, just some information around resident engagement, speaking to people that have brought a deputation or a motion or questions for council, and those working groups have a look at the constitution, just an idea of when that might happen, and then we were going to get those dates sent out to members so that we could pop into be a part of that really, because I'm really excited. I think it'll be a fantastic job, but unless anyone in the general public agrees with us, then we're back to ground zero on this. So have you got an update on that for us, Louise?
Apologies, I just unmuted and remuted myself. Yes, we do have an update for you. So we've been working with the engagement team, consultation engagement team on plans for public engagement. As things stood this morning, in response to the sort of a pre-style questionnaire through, I think it was through Hackney Matters, we've only had 8 responses to that, all of whom said they didn't know we had a constitution. Which, in conversation with our colleagues in the engagement team, does rather make then running focus groups around the changes we're proposing to the constitution very difficult to do, because there is no baseline. It's not like they were giving me the example of running a focus group about climate change. People have an understanding about climate change and what it means for them, or what they think it might mean for them, and therefore it's easier to have a conversation around, and what do you think we could do? Can we do something different? What could you do? Similar about conversations around things like employment, focus groups around employment, because everyone has an experience of that. But starting from a position of those who would be willing to participate, of which out of the 8, 7 said they would, them not appreciating we have a constitution means we would have to spend the vast proportion of the session engaging with them to tell them what the constitution is, because they haven't experienced our old version of the constitution. The changes we're then making and proposing.
Louise, I guess all of that, in a sense, it is relevant, because even if we start this with the baseline, we still want people to say, what we put before you, is it accessible? Is there enough explanations in there? Can we move through the document easily enough? After reading this, if you've not even heard the word constitution, do you have an understanding? So I would argue or say, if you don't have a baseline, you set this as a new baseline, and then with the work going forward, after a year we've updated some more, then we can reference back, or we can look at the old style constitution before we made the changes, and get people to look at the new style and ask people to compare. I just feel like we're going down one of those, we're getting into one of those spaces in the council that often, when something presents itself as really difficult, we don't often see a way forward to move. We need the general public to have a look at this and give us feedback before we present it to everyone, for us to say, yeah, we've done this great thing, we need ratification. So, yeah, that's like Councillor Gordon, you want to come in?
Yeah, and I was just going to agree with that, Chair, but I think I'm also going to sort of add another point really in terms of accessibility to the Constitution. I just wonder whether it has been, whether we've been following best practice in terms of neurodivergence, really, you know, and we raised originally about dyslexia, but in terms of sort of there's obviously different types of neurodivergence, you know, sort of fonts, how many different links were, you know, sort of colours and that sort of thing. I mean, I don't know if there's any sort of advice, you know, that can be given, just it's helpful that way. So.
Chair, yeah, I want to echo both what you just said, but also just ask if this has only gone out to the Hackney Matters group. I just wanted to double check whether it's also gone out to those people who've identified and has something already engaged in the Constitution, so people who submitted petitions, dissertations, etc. Because obviously that's a baseline of people who have engaged in some way with the Constitution.
We are separately making that contact, and also separately comms and engagement have been contacting Tenants Residents Association, voluntary sector groups. I'm merely reporting on what we've had back so far, the mechanism for that. I guess the issue around people who've submitted questions, etc., is yes, they will have an awareness of the Constitution, but some of that is not necessarily from, and I'm not saying it's right and wrong and we shouldn't be doing this, but I'm just drawing your attention to some of the issues that we may face. Is that for those people, we do as part of that process, we tell them things through the Constitution and we explain it to them. It may, so their knowledge may come from what we have told them as officers more than what is contained in the Constitution, if you follow my drift. So I think it's just, you know, I'm not saying don't do it at all. I'm just wanting to make sure that you understand the limitations of what we will be doing, and therefore, you know, certainly the what our colleagues in comms and engagement are telling us is that there are limitations to what we are proposing, and whether or not it would be better to first of all resolve the issue about public knowledge of the Constitution, and essentially once we've improved upon that baseline, come back to this question as part of that review at the end of you know, potentially the end of year one or sooner, to say, well, now you are aware of it, have we got some empirical evidence so that we've got more people asking questions, more deputations coming forward than we've had before? That might be indicative that more people are engaging with this version of the Constitution. How did they find out about it? And going through that process. That is essentially what they are proposing and recommending. But clearly, you know, we are directed by you in this.
Thank you. Any other comments? So some action really is just to get back to members as soon as possible, that engagement piece with some dates, bearing in mind that the timeline's quite short now because of the July cut-off point, and I'm just conscious that all the way through the process we've said that we include the public in this, and I think it's just too late now not to do that. It just wouldn't be the right thing to do. So we've just got to make that happen. So you can come back to us ASAP on email. I really appreciate that, and any work that I trust that we'll do, whatever work that you need to do with the engagement teams to make that happen. And between the five of us, I'm sure we'll try to be present on as many or at least a few of those sessions. And if you do them at different times, not just to suit us as members, but obviously the general public, we don't want to just do day time, for example, for people that are working. So that's an action.
Sorry, Chair, just to say that because of the number of resources that we had,
Yes.
the advice that we have so far is that we would potentially, moving forward, they would be able to accommodate two. We would want to be purposeful, but we'll take
That's fine. I'm not, you know, I'm not fixed on how many engagements.
Yeah.
I'm just certain that engagement has to happen. what that form looks like, how it transpires. So I would recommend then one is day, one is evening, to accommodate people's, working arrangements, lifestyle or commitments. So that's fine. I think that's reasonable in the time frame that we've got. I'm just certain that we need to do that and keep that commitment. Any other comments on this? Okay. So I've not been notified of any other business, but as I said to Councillor Love, I'm a very generous chair. I'm happy to take any overly action notice.
I just suddenly noticed, Chair, maybe obviously on page 474, it does say for the terms of reference for licence committee, there are no substitute labels for this committee. So I think that needs to be addressed, doesn't it?
Well, that's been
Yes,
that is the image, yeah.
And I noticed that planning got 6 substitutes. So it might be, you know, probably school might be the bad bit.
Yes. Yeah. And thank you, Dawn and Louise, because I know I had raised a view that you got back to me quite swiftly. There would be no issue to put that in place, because we discussed it, I think, a few weeks ago. Yeah. Not that I was preempting Councillor Charleston's concerns, but equally it's something that I have noticed and thought it's a problem that's easily resolved and resolved here through our committee. All right, so on that note, I'm only page 100. The next date of the next meeting is the 12th of July at 5:30, and full council will be 26th, and we'll be taking the constitution to full council. I'm sure you as committee members may want to debate the work at full council at that given point. All right, I'm now going to close the meeting. Thank you, colleagues and officers for attendance. Thank you.